Jeремі Адлера from King's College, and I do believe that this lecture will discover new perspectives in studying the creative activity, the works by William Shakespeare and by Goethe as well, because today we will concentrate our attention on the subject that combines both personalities, both genius of world literature, I mean Shakespeare and Goethe. And it's a great pleasure for me to say that Jeремі Адлер has already read one lecture for our students. He delivered lecture dealing with visual poetry, and we have brilliant results dealing with this lecture. The students of Zaporizhia National University have already written their positive feedback, their reflections on this lecture, and they have already prepared their own works dealing with the war in Ukraine and their personal reception of it in the form of essays and in the form of visual poetry. And I do believe that this lecture, which we are going to listen to today, will be the next step in our collaboration with King's College London. It is one of the most prestigious universities, not only in Great Britain, but in the world. And probably it will prompt some of our students the topics of their further research, of their maybe their creative projects or research papers, which will be offered for the competition. You know that every year the Ukrainian Shakespeare Center is organizing the annual contest of Shakespeare research. Shakespeare, it is called All Ukrainian Shakespeare Contest of Students' Research and Creative Projects. And probably this very lecture, which we are happy to listen to today, will be the first step on this interesting, intriguing, and exciting road of learning Shakespeare through the prism of German literary criticism and through the prism of the works of the genius of world literature, Goethe. So, dear Professor Jeремі Адлер, the floor is yours, and we can give you the possibility to share, if it's necessary, to share the handout. All our students have received renewed version of handout, and it is also represented in our chat. But if it is necessary, you have possibility to share the screen as well.
Thank you very much, Professor Торкут, Natalia. Lovely students. It's good to see you. I'm very happy to be with you in this morning. Here I'm in front of my garden. The sun is shining and the roses are blossoming in the garden, as I hope they will one day blossom everywhere. I would like to begin, my dear students, by showing you a few books, because books is what we are here looking at. Here is a new book by Mr. Kaplan, Professor Kaplan. It's about the tragic mind, and it explains that you need two things to understand the world and to do politics. The first is maps, geography, and the second is Shakespeare. You need Shakespeare in order to understand politics and to develop a proper understanding of the world. Now, he argues that the reason why we should look at Shakespeare is because of Shakespeare's understanding of tragedy. I disagree. I think it's because of Shakespeare's understanding of the human possibility that enters into all aspects of life and, of course, into politics. Now, because you are my students today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my biography, because this is one of the first Shakespeare books I ever studied. Here is my signature in 1965. And the play is Antony and Cleopatra, which I studied when I was 1965 at school. Now, here is another book. This is a wonderful little series of Shakespeare books, which are not so popular with teachers because they're very good and very cheap. And it's the mentor book. And here I studied measure for measure when I was a student at university with the great British dramatist Simon Gray. Simon took us through this play when I was a student in 1966, just before 68, which I also experienced, but that's another story. We went through this play word by word. Now, you can see some things behind me, books everywhere, books, books, books. So I will show you some more books. This here is the paperback edition of Goethe's complete works, prepared about 1900, in the late 19th century, early 20th century. Now I'm going to give you a little surprise. Here is the edition. Can you see it? And here is more Shakespeare. Yes. Okay, we come down here, and here you have the literature of persecution, because I'm writing a book about persecution in which one or two places in Ukraine are also mentioned. Now, more important than persecution, here is the book, Other Shelves, about international law, that which should hold us together. And in these books on international law, what do I find well prepared for you? This here is the first book about sovereignty by Jean Bodin in the 16th century. And here our idea of national sovereignty emerged, that a nation has the right for self-determination and to create its own freedom. Now, we will see in a moment how this idea is transmitted into our discussion today in a purely literary and non-political way. So this is my little introduction. See my books, and now move into the lecture proper. And I will begin by saying that Goethe's interest in the subject of Shakespeare was aroused in the 18th century and particularly stimulated by the Shakespeare celebrations of Shakespeare's birthday, which were prompted by David Garrick, the great Jewish British actor, probably the greatest actor in England of all time, who wrote a very long ode to Shakespeare, which you have in your handout. And Garrick's ode contains many of the key themes, in fact, all of the key themes that become typical for the Shakespeare worship which developed after him. Now, Garrick's ode has a central place in the history of Shakespeare reception in Germany. So I'm going to pause for a moment and tell you about this reception before coming back to Garrick's ode. Now, in the 17th century, just as the Beatles went over to Hamburg in the 60s, British actors and British acrobats and British singers traveled across Europe into Central and Eastern Europe, performing, dancing, playing magic tricks, and also performing version of English plays. And this was a strange route by which English plays reached Europe without books, without academic context. And so you get to the situation where one of the great German dramatists of the 17th century, writing during the 30 Years' War, published a book about wrote a play about Peter Quince. And he didn't know Shakespeare at all. He got the plot from the traveling players. Now, in the 18th century, this interest developed a little bit more concretely around the time when the British were discovering Shakespeare as their great writer, and the poet and novelist and translator Wieland one of the founders of German classicism, began to translate Goethe's plays. He did quite a few of them, very largely into prose. Although he was a poet, it was too early in the discovery of Shakespeare really to manage a proper verse translation. And this became immensely important, this translation. It laid the foundation for modern Shakespeare studies in Germany. And one of the first readers and most important readers of this translation by Wieland was Goethe. And Goethe then adopts Shakespeare as his inspiration and his friend. In his novel Werther, the central character Werther always writes his letters to his friend Wilhelm, who is taken to be modeled on Shakespeare, William Shakespeare. Wilhelm Meister, Goethe's great novel of education, takes his name Wilhelm from Shakespeare, William Shakespeare. So Goethe regards Shakespeare as a brother, as a friend, as a consolation, as an inspiration. And what happened after that was that the Romantics then discovered Shakespeare, and two poets, Schlegel and Tieck, produced an enormously important Shakespeare translation known as the Schlegel-Tieck translation of all Shakespeare's plays into verse. And this is a very, very good translation indeed, so good that it's still performed in the theatres today. So Goethe's appreciation of Shakespeare takes a central place in this development because Shakespeare takes Goethe, as I've said, as a friend, but also as a mentor and a guide. And if we look back at the greatest poets of history, this is something which they all do across the generations. If you think of Virgil, the poem by Virgil, it is modeled on Homer. If you think of Dante, he takes Virgil as his guide. And in the same way, Shakespeare becomes, for Goethe, the great figure. So these enormous geniuses, far beyond our comprehension, look to each other across thousands of years to help inspire their writing. So we are very small, little, unimportant things in this universe. But we can look up to these people and see how they create a tradition of literature for all time. And that's what we mean by a classic. A classic is not for yesterday, it's not for today, it's a book which is for all time. A classic, you could say, has class. Now, I'd like to go to the handout and look at the ideas that are important for Goethe in what Garrick does. And there's a very interesting linkage between Goethe and Garrick, which we will follow through at this point. Now, if you have the handout before you, you'll see in the very first word, the very first line, the word genius is mentioned. The idea of the genius is central in 18th century aesthetics. The genius is a grand, self-creating universe of a human being. A genius is like Prometheus. As Prometheus makes men, the genius makes art or is a military commander. Any form of human activity can be conducted by genius. So, for example, Shakespeare creates geniuses. Churchill was also one of these men in defending human liberty in the Second World War. And a genius, as with Churchill or with Shakespeare, fires up a whole country, a whole nation, or even the whole world. So genius is global. You cannot imagine a genius who does not have global appeal. And so literary globalization is carried out by the genius. Now, if we look at the next stanza in Garrick, we come to the words demigod, fancy, nature. So the demigod, that's that idea of genius again. The genius is like a god, a small god, capable of creating everything. Now, he is supported in this by the imagination, fancy, in the text here, because it's through imagination that we can transport ourselves throughout the world at any moment in time. So Shakespeare can take us to Denmark, he can take us to France, he can take us to Verona, he can travel everywhere in the mind and in the world through imagination. So the imagination is the power that releases the energy of the individual and allows it to enter into every part of the world, but also to recreate that world in his works. So if you think of, I don't know, you won't like me mentioning Tolstoy, but Tolstoy is able to recreate the whole struggle between Russia and France to create an idea of national identity for Russia to get rid of Napoleon from its history. Of course, it's the other way around now with Ukraine and Russia, but it's always the same story. Geniuses generally become involved in some kind of national struggle because they're creating identity, and identity of the one would always come into conflict with the identity of the other. Now, the key term here next is nature. Nature becomes the watchword for Goethe and for German Romanticism, just as it is in France for Rousseau. It's the 18th century which discovers nature as the home of man, the creator of man, the model of man. By nature, then, we mean a world that grows, that's organic, that's harmonious, that's vital, that's alive. So you could say now, we are living nature ourselves, and nature can never be destroyed. This is anything that man makes will be destroyed one day. Kingdoms, palaces, temples are all destroyed, but nature is permanent. So when the genius comes into touch with its nature, it is an unbelievably powerful force. Now, the last quote on this page I'd like you to look at is "When law is weak." Now, here Garrick is telling us something very important. Literature, here the poet, holds the swords and scales. These are the swords and scales of justice. So the poet is judging moral action, attributing blame and guilt on the one hand, praise and freedom on the other. So it's the poet who creates the imaginary world of the nation, not the politician. Because ultimately we are judged in poetry, in literature, and in verse. And who remembers what Henry VIII said to his wife? Or his wives, I should say. Now, following on from the Garrick celebrations in England, which year was that, Natalia? Do you remember? 17, whatever it was. I'm terrible with dates.
1769, it seems to me.
That's it. Yes, 1769. And 1770 something else. 1771, 2 years later, Goethe made a similar celebration in his own house in Frankfurt with his friends. And he wrote a poem, a sort of lecture or a sort of address on Shakespeare's birthday. And this became a kind of manifesto for Goethe's works. They didn't have manifestos in the 18th century. They held lectures, they wrote odes, they held speeches. And this text, I'm always getting things wrong in my lectures, it's just to keep you on your toes. Summarizes Garrick's position, but it marks a transition in sensibility. The piece by Garrick belongs to the world of Dr. Johnson, his friend. Dr. Johnson and Garrick were great friends, and to the world of English classicism, marked from Dryden and Pope up to about Johnson. But Goethe marks a transition, and you can hear it in the tone of his writing, the sense of excitement and exuberance and passion that fills Goethe's words. The first page that I read of him made me his for life. Do you see that completely different rhythm from Garrick, to whom blessed genius of the isle? Garrick is elevated, distant. Goethe is impassioned, intimate, immediate. So they both worship Shakespeare, but the one as a kind of man of the theatre, a practical, inspired man, the other as an impassioned writer. Look at the last line here. And I cry, nature, nature, nothing but nature. It's the same word, nature, but look at how different. Nature's glory. Garrick is qualified, nature's glory. There's a kind of, he's holding back on emotion. He's balancing in that style. When nature led him by the hand, see how moderate in his praise he remains in comparison to, I cry, nature, nature, nothing but nature. So between Garrick and Goethe, we notice a change in sensibility, a move from classicism towards romanticism, or more exactly, the German Sturm und Stress. Now, Goethe has a consistent dialogue with Shakespeare throughout his works. His first major play, which is on your list on page 1, Götz von Berlichingen, is a Shakespearean drama about a robber baron, and it marks the transition from the feudal order to the modern capitalistic order of today. And the new transition from the feudal lord to the government by administration. Now, where did this come from? It's straight out of Shakespeare. He's politicizing drama to look at the identity of his country. And just as Shakespeare came to be seen as forming British national identity or English national identity, depending on how you see it, Goethe sets out to create an ideal for German identity based on the medieval worldview. And the play crashes in the end. Of course, the medieval view is destroyed. Götz is destroyed. All he stands for is destroyed. And all that we have at the end are his words, freedom, which he dies with on his lips. Now, this play not only follows the Shakespearean sense of creating a national identity in a German robber baron, it more obviously imitates Shakespeare's dramatic style. But it goes over the top. It's crazy. It's like The Who coming after the Beatles. It just goes wild. It is written in 56 scenes, 56 scene changes. Hamlet, Shakespeare's longest play, only has 29 or so. Some say 28. Now, it requires scene changes from a castle to the country to a village. It goes all over the place, and it needs horses on stage as well. So it's a huge development of Shakespeare based on a kind of misunderstanding that he can do everything. And Goethe's mentor and friend, Herder, wrote skeptically about this to Goethe: Shakespeare has completely ruined you. Der Shakespeare hat.
Looks like he disconnected.
Probably something wrong with his connection, not with ours, because we are all here. Let's wait for a moment. Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Jeremy. Everything is okay, and we can go on. There was some troubles with connection, but now everything is okay.
I can't see you at the moment. I'm just trying to. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
We hear you, and we see you. So you may go on.
Everything's good. Yeah. So here you see here we see a direct transposition of what Goethe understands as a Shakespearean drama into the German heritage. And part of the reason he does this is to destroy the role of the classics of Greek theatre, the five-act drama with its limited number of characters and its highly stylized presentation. So this is a play of theatrical and political liberation. Now, Goethe then adopted this Shakespearean form of drama, which Brecht calls open drama, because it's open-ended and open in character. So Brecht has a very good word for it, as opposed to closed drama of the classical type. Again, it's Brecht's term, closed drama. And he uses this for his first version of Faust, which is very much in the Shakespearean tradition. And in Faust 1 and 2, he pays homage to Shakespeare, for example, by quoting Ophelia's song from Hamlet for his Gretchen. You know, I came in a maid, I went out, and so on. So the loss of virginity in Shakespeare's Hamlet is rehearsed in Goethe's play. So he's looking at one of the most intimate moments in human life, when an individual gives up their virginity to another one. And he's focusing on that and looking at Shakespeare to do that. And he's bringing the subject of sexuality into the open in his play. Again, this is a moment of liberation. Now, the novel Werther, which I've said is addressed to Wilhelm, is in a way a kind of Shakespearean novel in its adoration of nature and its focus on a unique character. Now, if we think of great figures in literature before, like Oedipus or Antigone, or anyone we want to think of in Homer, we don't exactly think of them in terms of character in the way that we do with Shakespeare and Goethe, because in the classics, the character is usually honed down. Elements of individuality, elements of error, fault, everything incidental in the great Greek models is removed, like in Greek sculpture, so that you see the pure essence of the human being in a moderate form. But with Shakespeare, the opposite happens. That character becomes a negotiable quality in the drama, with absolutely trivial elements introduced into the character to make it specific and unique. Just imagine the moment of Othello with the handkerchief. Can you imagine a handkerchief in Oedipus? You can't. You can't imagine Othello without the handkerchief, but you can't imagine Oedipus with the handkerchief. Because the handkerchief is a symbol of the new civilization of manners. It's something which is created during the civilizing process in the 18th century, when you don't blow your nose onto the street, but you're an aristocrat and you have a handkerchief to blow it into so nicely. And today we're all little aristocrats when we use our handkerchiefs, because it's both a very individual element and a marker of civilization. Just as you don't spit other people into the face, you don't just go with your nose. Now, Werther is Shakespearean in that sense, that Werther is a unique character. Next, I'd like to come on to Goethe's second major play, Egmont, which continues the Shakespearean method in a much more moderate manner. And I'm going to play you a little piece of music, if I can find it. But Egmont is very interesting in that it takes up the idea of sovereignty that Jean Bodin introduced. And Egmont revolves around the sovereignty of the Dutch people. Now look at this quotation, if you have it, from Egmont Act 4. The emperor has decided what no prince can decide. He wishes to weaken, oppress, and destroy the strength, the nature, the idea of his people. This is Philip II of Spain. He wishes to destroy the innermost kernel of their identity, surely with the aim of making them happy. He wishes to destroy them so that they become something different. So there you have the theme of the clash of a nation and its oppressor. And I will now play you something. Beethoven takes up this theme. And here we will just hear that self-same theme just coming up in Beethoven's Egmont Overture. Everything that I've just said about Egmont can be found in this overture. I hope it comes up. So what the play is focusing on, here we go. Oppression, 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 threat, diminuendo, freedom, life, liberty, threat. Okay. So just Google if you couldn't hear it, please just Google Beethoven Egmont Overture after the class. And there you will find it. So what Goethe does here is to represent on the stage the battle for national sovereignty of the Dutch people in the 18th century, which is the time of the liberation of the people. You think of the American War of Independence. It's the same issue. America's liberation from Britain, the Dutch liberation. And although the central character dies, his death gives rise to the emergence and freedom of the Dutch people. Now, what time am I stopping, Natalia? What time should I stop?
We have time enough.
Okay.
Яна, I'm sorry, Яна, when should we, Яна, коли ми маємо закінчити?
Ну, у нас пара завершується о 10:55, а потім велика перерва.
Мгм.
Ми можемо ще якийсь час затриматись.
Півгодинки можемо ще, да?
Навіть 40 хвилин є і
Mhm.
більше.
Dear Jeremy, we have half an hour or even 40 minutes if necessary in order to give the possibility to ask questions probably. So half an hour. Is it
Good.
okay?
Perfect.
Mhm.
I won't need so much. So, and what Goethe here learns from Shakespeare in this much more focused play is to represent what he takes as a particular characteristic of Shakespeare, which you'll find, if we go back to our first quotation, when he calls Shakespeare a beautiful cabinet of curiosities, in which the history of the world parades past our eyes. Now, this is many, many ideas here in the one sentence. We have the idea of the history play brought in. He's thinking of Shakespeare's histories, but he's expanding it to the whole history of the world. So we can look at foreign countries like the Netherlands in our reading of or watching of his work. And we see the cabinet of curiosities. This is a world full of individual differences, of idiosyncrasies, of unique characteristics. Shakespeare's characters, you remember I was saying it a moment ago, they're all individuals. Everyone is unlike every other. No two characters in Shakespeare are the same. You can't change one character without undermining the integrity of the whole play. Just think of Pistol or How. This is not Antigone and Creon. This is two individuals growing and changing. Look how changes. Antigone never changes. She's always Antigone. How changes from one play to the next to give this sudden reversal, because Shakespeare's characters can learn to grow, like Hal, or they can regress, like Othello. So the human character has this potential to grow, to remain static. Quite a few characters in Hamlet, like Polonius, are static, or they regress. These are the three laws of growth in human life. And Shakespeare follows this, and Goethe follows this as well. So a character like Egmont grows. He is at first a bit of a lover and a glamour boy, and then he becomes a hero. His beloved Clara, little Clara, grows when she commits suicide for the sake of the state. So an important point then is that the cabinet of curiosities contains unique characters whose destiny is embedded within the character. These are not impersonal forces that are fighting against each other, but people, individuals. And this is what Harold Bloom and everyone talks about as the great Shakespearean transition. It's the change into our modern world, and the battles that Shakespeare fought and that Goethe fought are still going on today, as you only know too well. Now, in Goethe's novel, The Wilhelm Meister's Apprenticeship, Shakespeare again plays a major part. Wilhelm wants to become an actor. He's introduced to the classical theatre, and then a friend introduces him to Shakespeare. And this causes a complete transformation in Wilhelm's outlook on life. You can see here in the first quotation, line 2 and 3, when Wilhelm reads Shakespeare, his whole soul got into turmoil. This Shakespeare then completely upended his personality. So what do we have here? We have Goethe, the novelist, taking his character Wilhelm, and just like the play within a play in Hamlet, he puts a play into his novel. And the play that he puts into his novel is Hamlet. So this starts up a kind of hall of mirrors situation in which one work mirrors another. This is called by André Gide, G-I-D-E, André Gide, the so-called mise en abîme. M-I-S-E-E-N, abîme, A-B-Y-M-E, mise en abîme. The idea of the mise en abîme comes from medieval heraldry. You have a heraldic sign, and in the corner of the sign, the same image is replicated. So you have an image within an image. That's the idea of the mise en abîme, that it goes on forever. This back and forward of reflection, once you set up two works into the mise en abîme, into the confrontation between each other, the dialogue between them never ends. You'll be able to think, so for example, in Stendhal's novel, The Scarlet and the Black, Le Rouge et Noir, the constant dialogue set up between Julien, the hero, and Napoleon. Or in Joyce, in Ulysses, constant dialogue with Homer. So mise en abîme at work. So that is what happens also in Goethe's Meister. And if we go on to the, Wilhelm says that he doesn't know a play like it. And now the play, or the plays that he reads, affect him as much as any human being. So what's happened? Classical drama represents. A classical drama is a representation of reality. It stands for reality. But with Romanticism, the modern age begins where the drama or the literature is the reality. Literature advances to the world of the real and takes its place alongside other real elements. Whereas in Athens, everybody went to the same theatre, in London, everybody goes to a different theatre. We're all individuals going to our own theatres. In Athens, the public was paid to watch a particular play. In London, capitalist city, the individual pays to go to the theatre. So on the one hand, in the ancient world, the state invites the citizen to attend the performance and rewards him for doing so, both in terms of money and experience and loyalty. And in the modern age, it's the other way around. Now, line 3 or 4, the same words come as Garrick had used, heavenly genius. But again, genius is different here from in Garrick. He talks about genius of the Isle. He locates the genius in the Isle of Britain, this sceptred isle. Goethe raises the genius up to heaven. So the same word has totally different signification in different texts. And that you have to learn, that we all have to learn. That's the job of our business, philology, to go down to this level, to look at the word, to understand the semantic meaning, the grammatical context, the semantic meaning, the sense. But then we have to go beyond the grammar and the vocabulary and the sense to the cultural context. And the word then holds the cultural context in its hand. That little world is a world apart. Now, go on and look. Goethe or Wilhelm knows no moderation in his admiration of Shakespeare. The Greeks, the classics, are a symbol of moderation. But with Romanticism, with Goethe, immoderation takes control. He's going over the top. Open books of fate through which storm wind of the most agitated life is rushing. To see that rhythm, unstoppable rhythm, no halt, no moderation, no reflection. It's all emotion. Now, the 18th century had a big debate about the emotions and the intellect, reason and feeling, which we've forgotten, unfortunately. And here we see the side of feeling overtaking. Feeling then starts to become central because, of course, that's what lies in our heart of nature. So Goethe is a wonderful prose writer. I always say it, there are many great poets, but there are only one or two really great prose writers. Dr. Johnson is one of them, Shakespeare is another. Now let's look at what he says about the characters in the last paragraph of Wilhelm Meister, almost half the way through. His characters seem to be natural human beings. There you get the notion that the focus on character in Shakespeare, which became so important for Shakespeare studies into the 19th century, with Bradley and Bradley's criticism of Shakespeare, great British Shakespeare scholar. He focuses on character. We've moved on from that. We don't do character analysis in the same way today, but from Shakespeare to Bradley, from Goethe to Bradley, character is what defines Shakespeare. He creates unique characters. And then at the same time, Goethe recognizes they're not natural at all. He calls them composite creatures of nature. So a Shakespearean character is a composite. If you think of Hamlet with his complications, the prince, the lover, the existentialist, these are all really elements of different people, which you wouldn't normally associate them. If he has Hamlet's propriety, He won't seduce Ophelia. Hamlet is a character at war with himself, being made of different affects and different elements put together from different people into a new whole. And this is what Goethe recognizes, that Shakespeare's characters look real, but they're not real. They look familiar, but they're unfamiliar. We know them, but we'll never know them. And he says, they're like watches whose faces and cases were made of crystal. The possibility that Shakespeare gives us, that nothing else gives us, and no other writer, is to look through the character, through the crystal. A horse, a kingdom for my horse. We look through the words into the desperation at sea. Or if you think of Measure for Measure, again, we look through the characters to Vienna and the justice and the argument. Or a very complicated play like Antony and Cleopatra. Again, what a complicated figure Antony is. He's real, but he could never exist. So this is a central paradox of a Shakespearean character. And so they become infinitely interpretable. You never can cease interpretation. If you talk about a historical figure and you read one biography and a second biography and a third biography, basically they're all the same. But you read 3 views of Hamlet and they're totally different because the character is multiple, is a complex, and each one of us will have elements of that in us. So this leads Goethe to a central idea in the novel, which is not linked literally to Hamlet or Goethe or to Shakespeare, but is dependent on Shakespeare's idea of the individual. Because at the heart of the novel, there is a sentence of Wilhelm Meister, which I haven't got here quoted. He says, "From my very origins, from my very beginning, my aim was to develop and unfold myself completely as I am. Nicht ganz, ich, sorry, I've got to get a drink. I want to develop myself wholly as I am." So what Goethe learns from Shakespeare is to become a unique identity with a unique proclivity that nobody else can resemble. Now, totalitarian regimes want to destroy that. Liberal regimes want to realize it. So there you have it. At the center of Goethe's novel lies a liberal idea of self-determination, more like the American Revolution than the French Revolution. This is the American Revolution realized in Goethe's Shakespeare reception. Just like the Dutch Revolution against the Spaniards, the American Revolution liberated, but the American Revolution talks about the inalienable rights of liberty and so on, the 3 great symbols of the American Revolution. Now, Goethe's continuation with Hamlet and Shakespeare never ended. It was a long, long dialogue. And so he wrote this last essay on Shakespeare, Shakespeare and No End. And he's back again with the very, very first ideas that he had with a young man. there's a lesson to us in that. Never lose touch with your origin. Your origin is your most precious gift. That's before liberty and rights. Because it's your origin which bestows that to you. And Shakespeare joins with the world spirit, you see. He's back again to that early notion, going all the way back to Garrick. He penetrates the world. So we're in a more subtle variant on Goethe's earlier understanding. And something interesting had happened around this time in German theory, which is a very interesting topic to pursue. And that is that at the time of the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars, when the world was in upheaval, several thinkers abstracted the idea of tragedy to create the abstract notion of the tragic. They wanted to know what was the essence of the tragic which underlay the world. So the tragic becomes a quality per se and not tied to Aristotle's poetics. So it's the consummation of the departure from Aristotle, who gives the rules and the 5 acts and all of that which you know or can easily know, to a new view of tragedy. And this tragic always connects with a tragic conflict. If you like,
Want a cup of tea?
I'd love it. Now, if you go to page 5 in your text, the predominant mode in ancient drama is the disproportion between ought or duty, sollen, and attainment, vollbringen. What Goethe here does is to drill down into what he considers to be the essence of tragic drama for the ancients, the Greeks, and the moderns, Shakespeare. And he distinguishes this in what he calls the difference between what you ought to do, what you have to do. Creon has to oppose Antigone. Antigone has to oppose Creon. And what you can actually achieve. Antigone's attainment is doomed. Now, Goethe argues that there's a completely different dichotomy in modern drama, that between what you want to do and what you can achieve. What does Hamlet want to achieve? What can he achieve? Well, we know what he wants to achieve, his struggle for justice, but we know he can't achieve it because of the powers around him. So this is the tragic clash as Goethe understands it. Tragedy comprises a clash of opposites which is insurmountable. And you can go through, as you like, each of Shakespeare's plays and unpick this clash between, the terrible mess that Othello gets himself into through his wanting. Just a total disaster. And what he can achieve. In the end, nothing. So he's destroyed. So it's a tragic clash which ends in destruction. Thank you, darling. And the last paragraph, my wife is here. Come and say hello.
Hello.
Going to
Hello.
my
Hi,
French
nice to
class.
meet you, Eva. Hello, hello.
Hello, hello. Привет.
Добрий
Добрий
день.
день.
And if we go to the, sorry,
Last paragraph. It was last
yeah,
paragraph.
last paragraph. All of this is explained there. So we see Goethe moving from the Enlightenment view of Shakespeare with Wieland and with Garrick to the Sturm und Drang view of Shakespeare, the Storm and Stress Shakespeare with zum Shakespearstag and Götz von Berlichingen, to the Romantic view of Shakespeare as a representative of the tragic, which was also explored by Hölderlin, Schelling, and Hegel. And I can send Nataliya Торкут a reading list on that if you're interested. So one example of a writer influencing another. Now, I'll just round off my talk with one brief comment. In Virgil, it's Homer leading him going. In Dante, Virgil leads Dante through the underworld. But when it comes to Goethe and Shakespeare, there is no one play, no one work, no one theme. If you like, it's a Shakespearean reading of Shakespeare. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear Professor Джеремі Адлер. And I suppose that we'll have some questions from our colleagues and from our students. But first of all, I'm sorry. First of all, I would like to thank you for enriching our knowledge on Shakespeare as well as on Goethe. We learned a lot of new facts about German appropriation of Shakespeare, and we felt the very essence, the effectiveness of the dialogue between two geniuses through the ages. Thank you very much for mentioning the play Egmont that is not included, unfortunately, as far as we understand, that is not included into our university curriculum while we are studying Goethe. And the quotation that was used by you about liberty, about the dignity of the nation, that is very, very important and topical for Ukrainians in our present day situation. I'm also very much thankful for the idea of comparison of Garrick's ode and Goethe's ode on Shakespeare's birthday, and I would like to use at least 1 minute to show the Ukrainian experience. Яна, could you give me the possibility? Яна, дайте мені можливість поширити екран. I would like to show the quotation from Ukrainian translator of Shakespeare. This person, his name is Panteley Kulish. He wanted to translate 27 plays of Shakespeare because he connected the further development of the Ukrainian nation with Shakespeare. And in his poem dedicated to Shakespeare, it is like Garrick's ode, like Goethe's poem on Shakespeare's birthday. Panteley Kulish expressed the development of the idea. So he mentioned, "Oh, creative luminary, the Homer of the new world, come guide us," he means Ukrainians, "come guide us all the way to your renowned temple and help us leave behind our uncivilized past while promoting cultivated feelings and ideas." So you can see that in our country, Shakespeare was also a very important, prominent person who is guiding us to the civilized world. So the shaping of Ukrainian identity as a European nation is also closely connected with the personality of Shakespeare and his appropriation in our country. And the first question of mine will be, by the way, I'm very thankful for your brilliant metaphor that Shakespeare is infinitely interpretable. So it seems to me that it's the best slogan for our Shakespearean contest, because it emphasizes the idea that there are a lot of possibilities of interpreting Shakespeare. And I do believe that our listeners of today's lecture will be able to ask some questions. But my question is the following. Everybody knows that in the period of Romanticism, the idea that Germany is Hamlet was extremely popular among the intellectuals in Germany, and it is widely quoted in the critical works, etc. So could you explain what do Gervinus and some other German intellectuals, what did they mean while speaking that Germany is Hamlet?
Well, I think one important point about this is that Hamlet is reflective. Throughout modern history, Germans are being interpreted as excessively reflective. They think too much. This is sometimes taken as Hamlet's problem as well. He's thinking, not acting. He should just shut up and go and do something. The German sense of national self is Hamletian, if you like, because the Germans are always thinking about this and that and the other option, and it prevents them attaining any positive action. I suppose another way to look at it would be simply to say that this is Hamlet is presenting a provincial court, a small provincial court, and Germany was a number of provincial courts in the Holy Roman Empire. The scene in Hamlet is completely different from the setting of the history plays. If you think about the history plays and the way that London or Britain or England, or Lear also, if you include that, how Lear goes down to Kent, he goes to the coast. You can still hop on a train and you're in Dover in an hour. Just like Lear. So Shakespeare has a completely different setting for Lear and the histories as he does for Hamlet, this small, introverted, nasty, irrelevant court. And Hamlet is stuck there, and he wants to go abroad with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, because there's nowhere at home that he can study. He wants to go to Wittenberg. No Englishman would ever go to Wittenberg at that time. He would go to Oxford or Cambridge. So the notion of the petty court that Hamlet inhabits, which so truncates his capacity to act, which so limits him, could serve as a model for the German petty court before the unification of Germany. So that's a second point that would be relevant.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
But probably you would like to go on? No.
No, I've had my turn.
So thank you for these two brilliant ideas of explanation, the comparison or the usage of Hamlet as an image of Germany in the first half of the 19th century. And also thank you for the idea of comparison, the court in different plays of Shakespeare. It will be extremely interesting to compare the court in Hamlet and the court in Roman plays, like, for example, Antony and Cleopatra, and in historical places, as you have just mentioned. So, dear friends, dear students, would you like to ask some questions? It's quite possible to raise your hand or probably to write in chat. Олександр Горковенко, будь ласка. Пане Олександре.
Well, yeah, at first, thank you very much for your lecture. It was very interesting, and hope my English won't be too bad, so you could understand my question. So I wanted to ask you about the play of Goethe about Berlichingen. I read his memoirs and was very fascinated by his noble character. And as I understand, Goethe in his play crushes the forms of government of that time, the aristocracy, in favor of a capitalistic world. And so my question is, I probably would like to read this play someday, and I want to get a grasp on the ideas of the play beforehand. So I would like to ask, does Goethe in his play only crushes this form of government of aristocracy, or he crushes the idea of a perfect aristocrat himself, or the idea of noble warrior, like, how do I put it, the whole character of aristocratic warrior?
Very, very important question. Yes, thank you. That's an excellent question. No, you're absolutely right. He does not crush the idea of the noble warrior. He does not crush the idea of the aristocrat. And this theme becomes very important throughout the 18th and 19th century. You find it in Montesquieu, you find it in Tocqueville, you find it in Goethe. That, for instance, America, although it is a egalitarian society, had an aristocracy at the time of the founding fathers. And Franklin, one of the founding fathers, was recognized as a kind of aristocrat. So what developed into the modern age, which is still with us, I think, is the idea of the aristocratic bourgeois. You can be both bourgeois and aristocrat if you have the nobility, the cosmopolitanism, and all the rest. So thanks, that's a terrific question and very, very useful for further thought. Thank you.
And may I add something? It seems to me that nowadays it's extremely important to think about elite, national elite, not financial, but intellectual, cultural elite of the country that is to fulfill the mission that was typically aristocratic one during the previous times. But nowadays, intellectual elite is responsible for the choosing the way of further development of the nation. Thank you very much, and it's great that Goethe inspires us to think about such things as Alexandra has just asked, in his question. Well, who is
If
the
I
next?
could just come back, can I just come back on that quickly?
Yes.
You see it in Zelensky. He started life as the fool, and he then became the aristocrat. It's like the transformation of Hal from one personality into another. And it's possible. You may be determined by your nature, but you can transform it.
Thank you, Jeremy. And Kate?
I also want to say a big thank you for the lecture. It was very interesting and informative to listen to. On Shakespeare's birthday, Goethe describes his first encounter with Shakespeare as a moment of revelation. Why do you think this moment had such a profound impact on him?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. Different reasons, I think. I think very importantly, Shakespeare was the best writer since Homer who came into his sphere of consciousness. He didn't know Dante. Virgil isn't so good. So as an extraordinarily talented young poet, this was the first model who he could really recognize as close and superior. We all need somebody to worship. It's a terribly important facet of our lives. We worship each other, we worship our husbands, we worship our wives. And as writers, we worship our predecessors. It's so important not just to exercise ourselves, but to humble ourselves. And another reason was that Shakespeare offered a release from the constraints of 18th century German provincialism into a cosmopolitan worldview. And Shakespeare is probably our first cosmopolitan poet. You can't say that about Dante, you can't say that about Homer, you can't say that about Virgil. But this cosmopolitanism, which became so important to the world, was present there for Goethe in Shakespeare as a man of the whole world. And with his extraordinary genius, this was, if you like, Shakespeare could be the jug into which he poured his wine. So I think it would be very interesting to develop this argument in an essay. I'm sure you could, there's a lot more that could be said, but it's a very, very illuminating question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your answer. And we have a question in our chat before Korniev Dmitro asks his question. I must read the question in chat, at least one of them. Thank you. So, Svetlana Deineka, Institute of Literature of the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. Thank you so much for this incredible lecture. Your words, quote, "Never lose touch with your origin. Your origin is the most precious gift," end of quotation, "are priceless. Antony and Cleopatra is one of my favorite Shakespeare's plays as well. Do you think," it's the question, "do you think Mark Antony loses his Roman identity when he's in Alexandria?"
Yes, I think that this is definitely the case. There is this view of the East, the Orient, which is already apparent in Shakespeare's day and in the 18th, 17th, 18th century, that the East is effeminate. It's corrupt. It's debased. It's incapable of self-government. It's constantly going to war with no result. We see this now with our current Oriental despot in Moscow. They don't know when to stop. Even when the end is clear, they don't stop fighting. They're mad. And this is a typical characteristic of an Oriental despot that you have with Putin. And you lose touch with your origin, with your family, with your culture, and you go native somewhere else. And this is it's a very sharp point, that this is exactly what happens to Antony in his love for Cleopatra, in the notion all for love. You can't imagine Newton saying that. You can't imagine Napoleon saying that. It's crazy. And it allows when you allow the heart to rule over the head degenerates. It's not just a question of rule, but of disintegration. So the disintegration of Antony's character, I think you're absolutely right, has a lot to do with his departure to the Orient.
Thank you. And the next question is from Dmitro.
Yeah, thank you for your time, Sir Jeremy. You mentioned previously the idea that human creations like kingdoms and castles eventually vanish, while nature outlasting human creations. So do you agree that in the end nature will be the only thing left, especially if humanity destroys itself?
I don't actually think that, no, because I don't think humanity will destroy itself. And I think that culture will prevail in the same way that it will just move house. It will go somewhere else, but it will survive somewhere or other. Just as you can see now, America's leading role for the last 80 years is over. The torch is passing to another country. Britain had a leading role, that's over. Russia is desperately trying to assert its leading role, but it won't manage. So things are moving somewhere else. We don't yet know quite how or where. But the movement that underlies all our activity will in the end preserve us.
Thank you.
Let's believe. Well, and the question in chat, and then Volodymyr will ask his question. Anastasia Перевалова, thank you for your lecture. I really love it. My question is, what distinguishes Goethe's admiration for Shakespeare from that of his contemporaries?
You do like to ask difficult questions, don't you? He had the most capacious, the most wide understanding of Shakespeare than any other. He learnt to introduce Shakespeare into his works in a most productive way in Wilhelm Meister. So he learnt to survive his earlier rule by Shakespeare by somehow learning to mediate his ideas. I can't really say much more. You would have to look up the book by my colleague Roger Paulin, which is on your bibliography. It's slightly beyond my knowledge, or quite a lot beyond my knowledge.
Thank you very much, and I suppose that it will be very interesting for Anastasia. It seems to me. It's the question from Anastasia, yeah? If we compare, for example, Goethe's reception of Shakespeare with the ideas of Voltaire in France, you know that Voltaire was the first among Frenchmen who admired Shakespeare and started not translating but using the plots from Shakespeare plays for writing his own Julius Caesar and Hamlet. But at the end of his life, Voltaire became the hater of Shakespeare. And it's really very interesting question to compare how, for example, Frenchman and the leader of encyclopedists who wrote the first encyclopedia, how he interpreted Shakespeare from the position of classicism, and he criticized Shakespeare greatly. And the admiration and the deep penetration into Shakespeare's works from the position of Goethe, who was the leader, also the leader of the German spirit and German intellectual life of the period. It's very interesting question to compare these two contrast points of view if you speak about contemporaries, not only in German, but contemporaries all over the European continent. Okay, and someone would like to ask question? Volodymyr. Volodymyr, you're welcome.
So, thank you very much for your lecture. It was fascinating to learn the connection between Goethe and Shakespeare as well. And my question is, do you think young people today who grow up with technologies, some social media, can still feel the same strong emotions Goethe felt when he read Shakespeare?
Yes, I do. I think the form changes, the substance remains. I think it's still possible. I think
Thank you.
I can't say much more than that.
Thank you very much. And are there any other questions from the audience who would like to ask questions orally? If not, Наталія Кучерявенко.
Thank you very much for lecture. It was very interesting to know that these two personalities were connected even through such time. And I would like to say that you have said very interesting thing, that a lot of characters in Shakespeare's pieces of literature, they are unrealistic because they have a lot of character traits or different character traits, and they also play a lot of different roles. So my question would be, we are all playing right now different roles. We can be daughters, sons, can be teachers, can be engineers. So and also we have a lot of characteristic traits. They are different. We can be sometimes, I don't know, peaceful, sometimes we can be sad, sometimes we can be more optimistic, and also we still alive. So what is unrealistic in such characters?
But I'm not saying that it's unrealistic, I don't think. I'm just saying that the people that he creates do not appear like that in nature. What you have said relates to different moods and different roles. But in a Shakespeare character, it's not just a question of mood and role, but also of identity. And when we play different roles or have different moods, it's always the same me. And Shakespeare's characters are made up of different identities into one. That seems to me to be the difference. So that would be how I would try to answer your question. But of course, you could argue with my view and develop your view. That would be absolutely fine. That's how criticism works.
Thank
so
you.
I have no problem with that.
Let's develop our critical thinking, Natalia. Well, and there are two questions in our chat and one question from Sophia. The question from Prodanchuk Anastasia. thank you for this interesting lecture. My question is, Goethe claimed that Shakespeare's characters were completely natural, yet not quite human. Could we say that Goethe saw Shakespeare as creating symbolic or archetype, it's the term from Jung, archetypal figures rather than realistic ones? So symbols or
yeah.
archetypes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm sure you can call them archetypal. That would be a good word to use for them. I don't know if I would contrast it with realistic, because they don't have to be they don't have to be at odds with each other. But I would certainly, you can use that. I would be happy. I could use the word archetype very happily with you.
Thank you, Sophia.
Yes, so thank you very much for your lecture. So my question is, do you think that Goethe's reflection on Shakespeare still shape how we read Shakespeare today, or has maybe modern criticism moved in a different direction?
I don't know. I think you'd have to ask Professor Торkut that question. I haven't kept up. The only Shakespeare criticism I've read in the last 5 years has been textual criticism. I haven't got into it too much. You would have to ask Professor Торкут.
Okay, thank you.
It seems to me that Goethe has launched the process of reflections on Shakespeare, of taking Shakespeare too close, not only to the mind, but also to the heart, to our souls. And this intimate relationship between the personality who reads and who reflects upon the text with the idea of the text, it is really very, very important. If we take the text not only as a source of new ideas or maybe some aesthetic experience, but much closer to our penetration into the essence of life, into the essence of universe, human's nature, and the nature of it, and the nature itself, and the society, etc., etc. So we can say that Goethe was that very genius who inspires, is still inspiring us to read Shakespeare not only as a text, as a pieces of literature, but as something that is very important for us and that can explain to us something that we can't understand without Shakespearean texts. Or probably we could, but Shakespeare helps us to do it more intimate and more interesting. Probably I tried to answer your question, Sophia. And there is one question more, and unfortunately we have to finish our meeting because there will be next lectures in our students' timetable. And there is a question, yeah. Anastasia Holявko, thank you for the lecture. And okay, then will be Alexandra's question. It is the last. Well, so Anastasia Holявka, thank you for the lecture. It was very interesting. Shakespeare and Goethe often touched upon the theme of freedom of the people. Please tell me, do you think that works of Shakespeare and Goethe are particularly relevant for Ukrainians today? And which works reflect the idea of freedom the most?
Oh, yes, I think, again, this is Professor Torkut's territory rather than mine. I can't speak about Ukraine. I'm just a distant visitor. But of course, Egmont is immensely important. And if you listen to Beethoven's music to Egmont and read Goethe's play, nothing could be more relevant than this, because there's an interesting idea which comes up in the 18th century, and it's the idea of national dignity, that a nation, not just an individual, has dignity and has its own dignity. And this was brought up by the Swiss thinker de Vatel, and it's reflected in Egmont, and it's what Ukraine is fighting for today in its liberty. It wants to be granted its own dignity as a nation among nations. So this it shows a direct line from Goethe to 20th century considerations. And Shakespeare, you can, I think one of the most constant themes in Shakespeare is the question of good government. How should kings behave? How should kingdoms be ruled? How are kingdoms destroyed? How can kingdoms be preserved? And these thoughts on government are precious, immensely important, timeless notions, which are as important to Ukraine today as in every country, and how identity can be preserved, corruption overcome. It's just a touch Shakespeare where you want, you'll find something that speaks to you today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jeremy. I agree with you completely. And thank you very much for that brilliant quotation from Egmont, which emphasized our attention upon the desire of the emperor or the dictator to corrupt the universe by means of oppressing some other countries and some other people. And I'd like to add some words to your answer, because it is really closely connected with our present day situation in Ukraine. Probably you remember that during the first days just after the full-scale invasion, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, used Shakespeare's Hamlet's words while taking speech at the British Parliament. He said, "To be or not to be," that this Hamilton question was before the Ukrainian nation some days ago. He meant 24th of February 2022, but now it was in at the beginning of March. I don't remember the date, but it was the first days of March. But now we have already answered this question. So our nation has chosen to be. And I would like to show you a short fragment. Can I share my screen? Yes, it seems to me. It is, can you imagine the situation, the first days of full-scale aggression? It is the 16th of March, 2022, in Ivano-Frankivsk theater that turned to be the shelter for those refugees from Kherson, Mariupol, Kharkiv, from the territories that had been occupied that period of time. All these people gathered in the building of the theater. They spent their days and nights, they lived there. And this very time, in the basement of this theater, Rostislav Drzypilski, the director of Ivano-Frankivsk Drama Academic Theater, staged Hamlet. And could you imagine how the people who were the spectators felt that period of time while listening to these words by Hamlet, reproduced by Alexei Khnatkovsky, the famous Ukrainian actor, who took Ukrainian flag as a symbol of our further resistance and our endless resilience. Could you listen at least 2 minutes?
І от питання. Бути чи не бути? У чому більше гідності? Скоритись долі і лягти під стріли? Чи опором зустріти чорні хвилі нещастя і тим спинити їх? Винен розум. Це він блідими робить нас і барви всіх поривів наших. А відважні наші плани по роздумах воліємо відкласти чи зовсім поховати. Хтось тут є?
I suppose that it's a vivid illustration of the role of Shakespeare in our contemporary life. Well, we have only 4 minutes before the beginning of the next lecture. So, Alexander, try to be as quick as possible to ask your question.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you so much for the lecture. It was fascinating. I'd like to ask you, despite, this Goethe's Faust and Shakespeare's Hamlet, despite belonging to the different areas and culture context, I think we can find and can there be drawn some parallels in the terms of internal conflict or some philosophical depths, such as, while I say philosophical depth, I mean such as, nature of good and evil and the free will. Can there be drawn between those two masterpieces, I guess?
Sorry, I didn't get the question.
Can these parallels between Goethe's Faust and Shakespeare's Hamlet, in terms of eternal conflict, be drawn between these two poems?
Yeah.
If you compare Hamlet and Dr. Faust.
You can draw a parallel, of course, but the standard parallel would be with Marlowe and the whole idea of Marlowe the overreacher, Marlowe's Faust, Marlowe's other plays. The theme has been well explored by the American critic Harry Levin in a book called The Overreacher about Christopher Marlowe. And that provides a very interesting context in Shakespeare studies and the link to Goethe. I suppose you're right to point out the parallel between Hamlet's soliloquy and Faust's soliloquy. In the novel between in the scene woods and cavern, where Faust looks at himself as unaccommodated man, which is comparable to Hamlet, also comparable to Lear, the human being stripped naked of all attributes. So you're right there. That is definitely Shakespearean in Goethe's Hamlet, Goethe's Faust. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, dear Professor Джеремі Адлер. It was really very, very inspiring lecture. And I see that there are a lot of questions, and even in our chat we have the question, but unfortunately we are pressed by time. It's necessary to stop our lecture, to end it, because the students must go on their studies, and in accordance with our timetable, in a minute we have the next lecture. But now I'd like to ask all of us to react, to send their their emotions as for this lecture. Thank you very much, and I hope we will meet again. Студенти, будь ласка, відреагуйте якимись знаками, які можливі для, як ви сприймаєте цю лекцію. So, thank you very much.